Hello and welcome to Women in World History, the channel that believes every woman has a story the world should not forget. Today, we are talking about Matilda of Flanders, the first queen of Norman England and the wife of William the Conqueror. Let's get into her story. Now, some of you may wonder why I start this series with Matilda when England had had queens long before the Norman Conquest. The short answer is that Matilda's coronation was different. England had already been united under King Athelstan in 927, and queens had been crowned before Matilda. Elthryth was crowned with her husband, King Edgar, in 973. Edith of Wessex was crowned when she married Edward the Confessor. Even earlier, Judith, the daughter of Charles the Bald, had been crowned when she married King Aethelwulf of Wessex. But Matilda's coronation came 2 years after William's, in a ceremony of her own. She was also the first queen consort crowned at Westminster Abbey. More importantly, the ceremony did not present her as just the king's wife. It said that she shared in royal power and described her position as something granted by God. So this was not William simply putting a crown on his wife. The ceremony gave Matilda a clear public place inside the new Norman monarchy. That is what makes her such an important starting point for the queens who came after the conquest. Matilda was born around 1031 into one of the best connected families in Europe. Her father was Baldwin V, Count of Flanders, and her mother, Adela of France, was the daughter of King Robert II of France. So Matilda was not simply a count's daughter. She had royal blood on her mother's side and belonged to a family that sat right in the middle of European politics. Flanders covered land that is now part of Belgium and northern France. It sat between France, the German lands, the North Sea, and the English Channel. That made it rich, strategically important, and very useful to anyone who wanted an ally in Northern Europe. Matilda also seems to have been well educated. Her mother took religion and learning seriously, and Matilda grew up with the kind of education expected of a woman who might one day manage estates, patronize churches, and help run a powerful court. Medieval writers praised her intelligence, piety, charity, and beauty. Now, that word beauty needs a little caution. Medieval writers often mixed physical beauty with moral goodness. A beautiful woman was not always being described as physically gorgeous. Sometimes the writer meant she was graceful, virtuous, religious, or simply admirable. Her height is another story. Matilda has often been described as only 4 feet 2 inches tall because of an old examination of her remains. Later researchers questioned that measurement. She was probably short, but the famous 4'2" figure may be an exaggeration caused by damaged bones and an unreliable reconstruction. And if the stories about her personality are even half true, she was certainly not a fragile little princess. One later story says that before William entered her life, Matilda fell for an English nobleman named Brictric, son of Algar. He was a powerful Anglo-Saxon thegn and, according to the tale, a very handsome one too. Fair-haired, good-looking, and important enough to catch a young princess's attention. Matilda supposedly wanted to marry him. Brictric said no. Big mistake, at least according to the legend. Years later, after Matilda became Queen of England, Brictric lost his lands and ended up in prison, where he died. Later writers connected his downfall to Matilda and claimed she never forgave him for rejecting her. Historians are very doubtful about the romantic revenge story, but it survived for centuries because, frankly, it is exactly the kind of story people remember. Then came William of Normandy. Normandy was Flanders' powerful neighbor, and it had a reputation for producing extremely capable warriors and extremely messy family situations. The Norman ruling family descended from Viking settlers, and politics there could be brutal. Rebellions, assassinations, feuds, private wars, all fairly normal parts of life at the top. William himself was born into one of those messy situations. His father was Robert I, Duke of Normandy. His mother was Herleva, a woman of much lower rank. Robert and Herleva never married, so William grew up with a nickname his enemies never let him forget: William the Bastard. When Robert died in 1035, William was still a child, but he inherited Normandy anyway. From that point on, his life became one long fight to stay Duke. Several of the men protecting him were murdered. Norman nobles rebelled again and again. William learned very young that if he wanted to keep his inheritance, he had to be harder than the people trying to take it from him. By the late 1040s, he had survived long enough to become a serious political player. He had also reached the age when a good marriage could strengthen everything he had fought for. Matilda was an obvious choice. She was highborn, wealthy, royal on her mother's side, and the daughter of the ruler of Flanders. A marriage between them would give William prestige and turn a dangerous neighbor into family. Matilda's father also had plenty to gain from an alliance with Normandy. Politically, it was perfect. Romantically, the legend says it started with absolute disaster. According to a much later story, Matilda heard that William wanted to marry her and refused because she considered him beneath her. She was the granddaughter of a king. William was an illegitimate duke descended from Vikings. No thank you. William supposedly heard about this, rode straight to Flanders, found Matilda, dragged her down by the hair, and beat her. Then he rode home. This story is almost certainly not reliable history. It appears in later accounts, not contemporary evidence, but it became famous because the next part is even stranger. Matilda supposedly stopped her furious father from taking revenge and announced that she would marry William after all. Apparently, any man bold enough to attack her in her own father's territory was bold enough to become her husband. Medieval romance was a different genre. Whatever really happened, William and Matilda did agree to marry. The bigger problem was the church. Pope Leo IX opposed the marriage in 1049. The official issue was that William and Matilda were related within the degrees forbidden by the church, although historians still debate exactly what the relationship was. Politics may also have mattered. A marriage between Normandy and Flanders created a strong alliance in a very sensitive part of Europe. William and Matilda went ahead with the marriage anyway, probably in the early 1050s. They were not suddenly excommunicated in some dramatic papal showdown, as later retellings sometimes suggest. The dispute dragged on until 1059, when Pope Nicholas II finally accepted the marriage. As part of the settlement, William and Matilda founded major religious houses at Cong. William founded St. Stephen's and Matilda founded Holy Trinity. That version is less dramatic than overthrowing a pope, I know, but history does not always cooperate with the best gossip. Their marriage itself seems to have worked very well. William was harsh, energetic, and built for war. Matilda was educated, politically useful, deeply religious, and very good at the kind of courtly and administrative work that William needed. They were different, but the differences worked in their favor. They also had a large family, 4 sons and several daughters. Their eldest son was Robert, later known as Robert Curthose. Then came Richard, William Rufus, and Henry, the future Henry I of England. Their daughters included Cecilia, Adela, Constance, Adeliza, and Matilda. For a while, it looked as if their story would stay in Normandy. Then Edward the Confessor died in 1066, and everything changed. William claimed that Edward had promised him the English throne. To understand why that claim was even possible, we need to go back 1 generation. William's grandfather had a sister named Emma of Normandy. Emma married King Ethelred the Unready of England and had 3 children with him, including Edward, the future Edward the Confessor. When the Danish king Canute conquered England, Emma did something remarkable. She married the conqueror and became queen again. Her children from Ethelred were sent to Normandy for safety, so Edward spent many years living among his mother's Norman relatives. That made William and Edward distant cousins, and it gave William a connection to the English royal family. William later claimed that Edward had promised him the crown. Whether Edward really made that promise is still debated. What matters is that William believed, or at least insisted, that he had a claim. When Edward died without children, England suddenly had several men ready to turn that claim into a war. Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex and brother of Queen Edith, was chosen as king by England's leading men. William said the crown had been promised to him, and Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, had his own claim through an older agreement connected to the Danish kings. 3 men wanted England. By the end of 1066, only one would still be standing. Matilda backed William completely. She commissioned the Mora, the ship that became his flagship for the invasion, and when William crossed the Channel, he left Normandy in trusted hands. Matilda was one of the people who governed while he was away. That matters. William had spent most of his life fighting rebellions in Normandy. He would not leave the duchy with someone he did not trust. William defeated Harold at the Battle of Hastings in October 1066 and was crowned King of England on Christmas Day. Matilda did not rush across the Channel to join him. England was still dangerous, and William spent the next few years crushing resistance and trying to make the conquest stick. Matilda stayed mainly in Normandy until 1068. That year, she came to England and received her own coronation at Westminster Abbey. This was more than a royal fashion show. The wording of the ceremony said that Matilda had been placed in her position by God and that she shared in royal power. For a queen consort, that was a very strong public statement. William had conquered England with an army. Matilda's coronation helped present the new Norman dynasty as legitimate, sacred, and permanent. Around this period, Matilda gave birth to Henry, their youngest son, who would later become King Henry I. Afterward, she spent much of her time moving between England and Normandy. When William was in one country, Matilda could help manage the other. She issued charters, supported religious houses, handled property, and even took part in royal justice. Recent scholarship has drawn attention to her role as a judge, something especially unusual for an English queen at the time. Then trouble broke out in the family Matilda had been born into. Her brother Baldwin VI, Count of Flanders, died in 1070. His young son Arnulf inherited, but Matilda's younger brother Robert, later known as Robert the Frisian, challenged him for control of Flanders. Matilda supported her nephew. Norman forces went to help Arnulf, and the King of France also intervened. The whole thing ended badly at the Battle of Cassel in 1071. Arnulf was killed, and Robert took Flanders. For Matilda, it was a personal disaster. She had tried to protect her nephew and failed. For William, it was a political headache. Flanders had been a useful family alliance. Now, it was controlled by the man who had defeated Matilda's side. Still, Matilda remained one of William's most trusted political partners, and her reputation was helped by comparison with another member of the family, Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, William's half-brother. Odo was powerful, ambitious, and not exactly famous for modest living. Matilda, on the other hand, built a court associated with religion, learning, patronage, and orderly government. If William needed someone to fight a war, Odo was useful. If he needed someone he could trust with the family, the court, and the government, Matilda was the safer bet. But Matilda's family life soon became much more painful. Her son Richard died in a hunting accident, probably in the 1070s. At least one of her daughters also died young. After losing children, Matilda became even more devoted to religion and, from what we can see later, fiercely protective of the children she still had. That became a problem when her favorite son rebelled against his father. Robert Curthose was William and Matilda's eldest son. He was brave and capable, but he and his father were a terrible match. William wanted control. Robert wanted the power and lands he believed he had already been promised. Their relationship finally exploded in 1077. There are several stories about what started the rebellion. One says Robert's younger brothers dumped filthy water over him as a joke. William failed to punish them, and Robert decided he had had enough of being humiliated in his father's household. Whatever the trigger, the real problem was bigger than one family prank. Robert was an adult prince with no independent power, and he was tired of waiting. So he rebelled. Robert left his father's court, found allies, and eventually received support in Flanders. William expected him to run out of money and come home. He did not. In 1079, father and son actually met in battle. Robert knocked William from his horse and wounded him. According to the story, Robert did not realize who he was fighting until he heard his father's voice. Once he recognized him, he stopped and helped him. Imagine being William the Conqueror at that moment. You survive rebellions as a child, conquer England, defeat Harold Godwinson, and then nearly get killed by the son you keep complaining is not serious enough. And then William found out Matilda was secretly sending Robert money. This was the real crisis in their marriage. Matilda loved William, but Robert was her son. She could not stand by while he struggled, even if the person he was fighting was his own father. So she sent him money through intermediaries. William discovered it and was furious. From his point of view, his wife was financing an enemy who had taken up arms against him and nearly killed him. Matilda's answer was basically, yes, because I am his mother. Orderic Vitalis preserves a speech in which she says that if necessary, she would give her own life to save her son. Whether every word is exact or not, the idea fits what she actually did. She chose Robert's survival over William's orders. William tried to stop the money. Matilda found ways around him. He found out again. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, love, politics, and family loyalty were pulling them in completely different directions. Matilda then did what she had done throughout her life. She tried to hold the family together. By 1080, she helped bring William and Robert to a reconciliation. Robert returned to his father's circle, and for a time, the fighting stopped. But the relationship between father and son never fully recovered. William still did not trust Robert, and Robert never became the obedient heir William wanted. One thing I do want to correct from a common version of this story. William did not finally replace Robert with William Rufus as heir to Normandy. When William died in 1087, Robert still inherited Normandy. William Rufus received England, while their youngest brother Henry received money. So William remained furious with Robert, but he did not erase his eldest son's Norman inheritance. Matilda did not live to see that division. By the early 1080s, her health was failing. Her political activity became quieter, and she spent more time at Caen, especially around Holy Trinity, the abbey she had founded years earlier. She and William had been through almost everything together by then: political ambition, papal opposition, war, conquest, children, rebellion, betrayal, and reconciliation. They had spent long stretches apart because they governed lands on both sides of the Channel, but the marriage had lasted for roughly 30 years. Matilda became seriously ill in 1083. She prepared for death in the way a deeply religious medieval queen was expected to. She made gifts to churches and the poor, arranged her affairs, confessed, and received the final sacraments. She died on November 2nd, 1083, probably around the age of 52. She was buried at Holy Trinity in Caen. William outlived her by less than 4 years. Later writers describe him as deeply affected by her death. Some traditions even say he gave up hunting, one of his favorite activities, in her memory. Whether every romantic detail is true or not, one thing is difficult to deny. Matilda had been part of William's life from before he was a king, through the conquest that made him one, and through the family crisis that nearly destroyed what they had built together. And that is what makes Matilda of Flanders interesting to me. She was not simply William the Conqueror's wife. She helped govern Normandy, supported the invasion that made him King of England, received a coronation that openly recognized her share in royal power, took part in justice and patronage, and raised the children who would inherit both England and Normandy. But the part of her story I find most human comes at the end. For most of her life, Matilda and William worked as partners. Then their son rebelled, and Matilda had to choose between being a loyal wife and being a protective mother. She chose her son, even when it meant betraying the husband she had stood beside for decades. So what do you think of William and Matilda? Was theirs a genuinely loving marriage, a brilliant political partnership, or simply one of the strangest relationships of the Middle Ages? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Women in World History, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. For today, goodbye!